Welcome to another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast, where we discuss everything Orlando Magic basketball. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we've got a ton to get into coming off of NBA Media Day. But before we get started, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily Orlando Magic content. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers and trying to build the biggest Orlando Magic community here on the YouTube space. With that being said, remember to hit that post notification bell so you always know when we're dropping new episodes. And with that all being said, let's get right into it, starting off with a lot of the comments that were given out the other day. Obviously, NBA Media Day is the first step towards the start of NBA regular season play, and this is the way that we get reintroduced to the roster, whether that be new guys, old guys, a combination of different staff members. All types of information is given on the first day of Media Day because that's when everybody seems to be the most open, the most vulnerable, and the most excited to discuss what is going to be an exciting upcoming NBA season. And let's start with rookie Jace Richardson, the guard that was taken out of Michigan State, spoke on what it's going to be like working underneath of 11-year veteran guard Tyus Jones' upcoming season, a guy who, of course, is going to be not only his vet, but a dude that he's going to be in real competition for minutes with. And instead of viewing it as a quote-unquote position competition, it's more of a learning experience in this rookie season. I think that's something that's under discussed in this version of the NBA because guys are expected to come out and play right out the gate and produce. But this is what Richardson had to say. He said, when you have somebody who has been doing it for 10 plus years, you want to learn everything that they're doing. You don't last in the league that long if you're not doing something right. So just learning from him every day, especially me being a point guard, learning from a guy like that who has led the league in assist to turnover ratio for multiple years, just learning what he is doing right. And then he goes on later, Tyus Jones goes on later to speak about his experience learning under veteran guards like Ricky Rubio and the late great, I shouldn't call him late great, he's still alive, but Andre Miller, who also was an elite level point guard, not discussed as much as your, run-of-the-mill point guards of that time, the Chauncey Billups, the Chris Paul early on of the early 2000s, but a guy who is still very well respected within this league as well. And then Ricky Rubio, who of course recently retired due to mental health issues, but was a guy that after coming overseas, being drafted by the Minnesota Timberwolves, also was very productive in his time in the Western Conference as well. Jones said, I'm going to try to share everything with him. The NBA is so different than the college game, and you know that going into it, but there are still things you have to figure out. And as a vet, you want to try to help that learning curve just speed up. I'm just trying to be as vocal with him as possible, trying to share as much knowledge with him that I can. He is receptive of it. He is asking questions. He is eager to learn, and those are the type of rookies you want to have. Obviously, all good statements across the board when it comes to not just what Jace Richardson is looking forward to, but also what Tyus Jones is open to sharing. That's going to be a big part of this team. I said this last episode, and go back to the episode if you want to hear the long spiel around it. But the summarized version, the Cliff Notes, if you will, version of that rant that I went on about the aspect of camaraderie on this team is going to be so important. Obviously, the establishment of relationships across the board is going to be a big thing when it comes to building team chemistry and building momentum towards being a championship caliber team. Any championship winning team will tell you that they won the championship more off the court than they did with their play on the court. Their established relationships off the court as guys that hung out with one another, taught each other things, learned different things about themselves through seeing the work ethic of others. All of those things, of course, are usually the catalyst to championship caliber teams. But this team being so young, the camaraderie aspect of this team is going to be so important because when you pair that with the expectations of this upcoming season, it's so easy to get caught up in agendas. Desmond Bane needs to prove that he was worth the trade package he was given. Paolo Banchero was paid this summer where he got a 5-year max extension. He's trying to prove that he is a top 15 caliber player that deserves that kind of max contract. Franz Wagner is coming off of a Eurobasket championship as the lead option next to Dennis Schroeder, as a dude who's been told all this offseason, yo, you can be a number one option caliber player on the perimeter. Jalen Suggs is trying to bounce back from an injury that held him back for most of last season. If you go down the list, every single one of these guys still has a certain chip on their shoulder that is going to put them in position that want to play really well, but that can also become a real individual thing quickly. This team's ability to rally around one another is going to be so important, especially given the fact that with the Eastern Conference in the state that it's in, this team arguably has some of the best continuity of any team in the Eastern Conference right now. When you look at their roster from last season to this season, obviously the other two teams that come to mind are the New York Knicks, who have a completely different head coach. Yes, their roster is relatively the same than last year, outside of two or three major additions in the free agent market. But other than that, the biggest thing for them is probably still the most notable thing, and that's their head coach situation is changing, which can change their overall offensive and defensive philosophy. And then you have the Cleveland Cavaliers, who I think you can make the argument is like probably the most cohesive team from last season, but they're coming into a season where they may not have Darius Garland to kick off the year, and they're going to be relying on Lonzo Ball, who only played like 35 games last year, to come in and maybe start point guard for them. Once you get past that, a lot of the quote-unquote contending teams coming out of the Eastern Conference, they don't look anything like they did last year. And so the continuity of this team is that much more important, because outside of Tyus and Desmond, this team is the exact same. They got a roster boost for sure with that talent, but outside of that, this team is the exact same, which means the internal growth is going to be just as important as what those two guys bring to the table. All that to say, excited to hear what Jace Richardson had to say about Tyus Jones, and I think the fact that Tyus Jones is so open to it is even more important, because, you know, if you heard stories about bad vets before, those type of things can really stunt the growth of a rookie like Jace Richardson. And as a guy who already is probably not going to get a ton of minutes coming out the gate, being able to sit on the bench and just pick up little nuances from guards like Tyus, Desmond Bane, Jalen Suggs, it's going to be big for his development long term. Let's talk about injuries, because unfortunately that's something that the Orlando Magic are walking into the season with, and thankfully the news is not as terrible as you would think. Jeff Weltman, GM Jeff Weltman, shout out to him, or Magic president, /GM for the Orlando Magic, spoke on the injury statuses of both Jalen Suggs and Mo Wagner coming into training camp, saying, particularly with Jalen Suggs, we've kind of said all along that it's a long way to start setting goals that we've targeted, but we've targeted him for opening day. There's still a long way to go before we get there, but he's worked really hard. He's made a lot of progress. He's in an incredible mind space, and I think that he'll be a participant in whatever parts of training camp Arnie Kander deems applicable. Through that, we'll remain targeting opening day, and hopefully that will remain hopeful. That becomes available to him, if not somewhere right around there. On the other end, timetable for Mo Wagner is a little bit more distant out, but of course, coming off the fact that he tore his ACL last December, the expectation was that there was still going to be a little bit more for Wagner to get to the court. And he says, Mo Wagner's timeline is obviously different. He's further away. I think you guys know that. You know there have been, unfortunately, a series of ACLs the last decade of the NBA, and the associated timeline with that. But you guys also know Mo Wagner, and he's not your normal guy. So he's attacking it. We're hopeful he can beat that timeline, and what that looks like exactly, I think it's too soon to tell. Of course, the timeline for Mo tearing his ACL as of last December puts him, when you do it on a 16-month basis, which is typically the associated timeline with a torn ACL, that's putting him closer to about, the earliest is maybe mid-March at the best. And that's really closer to about 15 months. But given the ramp-up period and the fact that you probably wouldn't want to just drop him back in like right at the playoffs, March would be his most likely arrival time if he were to play this upcoming season. That's the long story short way of saying that there's a high likelihood that Mo Wagner will be missed for the majority of this upcoming season. That's going to mean a lot for the center depth situation, because that likely means that's going to be a lot more minutes for Goga Batadze. That also means that they're going to have to be a little bit more reliant on Jonathan Isaac. And I also would not be surprised if Mo Wagner's lack of presence on the floor also opens up time for Noah Penda to potentially get some experience at the small forward, power forward / small ball center positions as well in some unique lineups. So although we know that Mo Wagner, this is a guy that coming off the bench is able to really help lead a unit offensively. Not lead as the number one option, but be a guy that can help bring so much energy on the second unit that once upon a time this Orlando Magic bench was top 5 in the NBA in scoring. On the other end of it, his injury is going to open up a lot of opportunities for a handful of guys who are still trying to prove themselves on this Orlando Magic team. More particularly Goga Bitadze, who I think is a guy who is worth, the $20 to $25 million that I think he's going to be owed a season or two from now when he becomes an unrestricted free agent. He's playing for a contract, and a year like this one without Mo Wagner next to him is going to be an imperative year for him to show that he is worth that kind of money, whether it's to the Orlando Magic or somebody else. Same thing could be said for Jonathan Isaac. I think his ability to produce without Mo Wagner next to him, because he's so defensive oriented, he's going to have to grow offensively. Wendell Carter Jr. at the starting center position, even. This puts even more onus on him. We talked about him a ton last episode as a guy who needs to step forward as an option for this Orlando Magic team in his role, because the other 4 starters, their roles are really well defined. And don't get me wrong, Wendell Carter's role itself is well defined in retrospect as well. But in reality, he hasn't played up to the expectations that come with that role just yet. So now with a guy like Mo Wagner down, that further heightens the necessity of a guy like Wendell Carter Jr. to step up in a real way. So, the Jalen Suggs injury in particular is one that, of course, is going to be the most highlighted. Of course, he's like the 4th best player on the team, an All-NBA caliber defender, the guy that's going to be the lead point guard for this team for the entirety of the season, knock on wood, barring any other injuries, of course. And if the timetable is opening day, which means he's going to miss the entirety of preseason, not necessarily the worst thing in the world, but is going to be a little bit of a hit given that he's going to have to pick up his chemistry with Desmond Bane at the start of the regular season. That's still a really good sign for him. But I would also say this is the bright spot of bringing in Tyus Jones. This is the bright spot of drafting Jace Richardson. It's the bright spot of still having Anthony Black on this roster who can develop as an on-ball guy, and a player who that, honestly, if you look at our roster, Anthony Black probably translates the closest to a duplication of Jalen Suggs that we have on the roster. Of anybody that can be a ball-handling guard that can defend at a high level, it's Anthony Black. Now, the three-point shooting acumen is the part where we obviously have to start asking questions at. Anthony Black, not considered a knockdown three-point shooter through his first handful of seasons in the league, and a guy that I think, if we're being realistic, is always going to have that limitation on him as a guy that if he can't stretch the floor, can only be but so much of an asset to this team, which is why he's not, starting over Jalen Suggs, for example. So the question as to who starts at point guard if Jalen Suggs is not available by opening night is going to be a big question that we won't really be able to address until closer to that time. I would not be surprised if Tyus gets the start, or even Anthony Black. Maybe Anthony Black even gets the start, actually, next to Desmond Bane during preseason. I wouldn't even be surprised if there's some experimentations where, I think I've mentioned this throughout the summer as well, some experimentations with a lineup where it's more jumbo style, and maybe Desmond Bane is the smallest player on the court at 6'4", 6'5", and you have a lineup where maybe Franz Wagner is like point forward, Desmond Bane is your 2, Tristan Da Silva at the 3, Paolo Banchero at the 4, Wendell Carter or Goga Bitadze at the 5, and you have this jumbo lineup where you still have shooting from Desmond Bane, you have shooting from Tristan Da Silva, you have shooting from Goga Bitadze even, and there's this stretch floor aspect that you have around Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero, while also having all guys that can kind of guard multiple positions, with Desmond Bane being your weakest link defensively. That's something to experiment with during this preseason, and I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to play point forward with Franz Wagner a little bit, given everything that we just saw during Eurobasket, and of course the sample size for Franz during the regular season, merits that he's a guy that can be on ball a good portion of the time. You don't want to rely on him as your quote-unquote starting point guard, but I think he's a guy that can definitely take a pitch count for that spot. So important across the board when you talk about the injury situations, but I think that the Jalen Suggs outlook particularly is one where you're like, okay, I feel good about this situation, whether he starts day one or if he has to take a little bit more time, because we have the guard depth to make up for it. We have Franz who can play point guard in spots. And also, you do just really want to see Jalen Suggs get healthy. You'd rather get the baseline minimum 65 healthy games from Jalen Suggs and get an all-NBA defensive caliber season out of him than rush him back early trying to make this point out the gate with him, still relatively hindered, risk injury further, and now this team that should be a real contender in the postseason is missing one of their star guys in a role that is pretty unique to only him and maybe Anthony Black on this team as far as roles are concerned. So, but Jeff Weltman had a lot more to say than just, injury updates. He actually spoke on the state of the Eastern Conference, and I'm not going to lie, what he had to say was pretty eye-opening when you think about the fact that the Eastern Conference is viewed in a very different light than I think most people coming into the season would want. Obviously, the state of the Eastern Conference, most people would want it to be much more balanced, given the fact that parity has been such a emphasis of the NBA over the last 3 to 4 seasons or so. I mean, honestly, if we're being even more transparent, the last 5 to 6 seasons, there's been a consistent different NBA champion, which is a representation of that parity. But with the state of the Eastern Conference having guys like Tyrese Halliburton down, Damian Lillard is, no longer in the Eastern Conference, but also he was going to be injured going into this season if he was playing with the Milwaukee Bucks. Jason Tatum is out. There's a lot of these conversations around the Eastern Conference being significantly hindered. Weltman disagrees with that. He says I think the East was really strong. I think there are a lot of teams that are about to pop, and hopefully we are one of them. I look past this wave of injuries, and I just hope that we don't contribute to that. That's all. That's going to shift every year. One team is injured this year and healthy the next. And that honestly is a big determinant of who's on the lottery podium at the end of the season each year. So I think the East is very well positioned to be deep and strong for years to come, and hopefully we're part of that. I think that's really important to touch on, given the fact that this team truly went 41-41 due to their injury situation last year. I've said this a handful of times on the podcast, and it needs to be re-emphasized because it actually helps with understanding why the expectations for this team are so high this upcoming year, and that's that this team went exactly 41-41, 500 basketball last season, in a year where Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, and Jalen Suggs, their three best players from last year, played a combined 7 games together as a trio on the floor. That is a representation of just how significant the injury-riddled year can be to a team that the year prior made the postseason, was a top 5 seed in the Eastern Conference, they were a top team in the Eastern Conference. They were a team that pushed the Cleveland Cavaliers to 7 games in a series that seemed like many, at least on paper, viewed as a clean sweep, if not a gentleman sweep in the first round, that ended up going much further along. This team, when healthy, especially in a year like this one, where certain teams that are considered usually top of the Eastern Conference level teams, the Indiana Pacers, the Boston Celtics, are not nearly as factorable in the mix this year. Having a healthy year might be the number one thing for this team. And I think every team will say that, of course, but particularly for this team coming off of what last season was for them, having a healthy year, which is, again, even more important when you go back to the Mo Wagner and Jalen Suggs injury updates from the topic before. Having a not injury-free, because it's 82 games. It's an 82-game regular season. The likelihood of going an entire season with no significant injuries usually is very low. But being able to keep these guys on the floor for, let's say, the minimum 65-game requirement that's necessary in order to make an All-NBA team, that changes the dynamic for a team like this so much. So I don't necessarily know how much I agree with him about the East being quote-unquote strong, But I do think there's a certain balance amongst the Eastern Conference that's going to make it a lot more interesting than people are giving it credit. I think the Atlanta Hawks are in the mix. I've talked about this before. I believe the Detroit Pistons, with their guys, a lot of them playing for contracts, are going to be coming out swinging this year. I think that the Chicago Bulls, on the other hand, are a team that I think doesn't know how to get out of their own way. So despite the fact that I don't think they're going to be a factor in the Eastern Conference, I think they're going to be a team that tries to punch above their weight because they always try to punch above their weight. I think the Boston Celtics aren't truly trying to be bad, despite what everybody else believes. I think the Indiana Pacers don't know how to be bad. This is a team that hasn't missed the postseason in Lord knows how long. This team, that team was finding ways to be a fourth seed in the Eastern Conference and push a LeBron James-led Miami Heat team to 7 games back when Victor Oladipo was their best player. This team doesn't know how to not miss the postseason, right? So the balance within the Eastern Conference, I think, is there in a way where, although I don't think it's strong enough to say, oh yeah, there's 6-7 contenders coming out of the East the way we can say about the Western Conference, I think the balance within the Eastern Conference makes it where I don't think it's just going to be some cakewalk for the teams that you consider at the top of the mountain, the Knicks, Cavs, Orlando, right? Because you have to factor in Milwaukee still has one of the best players in the conference, arguably the best player in the conference, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. The Philadelphia 76ers, if they get themselves right, which is a big if, but if they get themselves right, that's a team that on paper, especially if they're able to bring back Quentin Grimes, Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, Joel Embiid, obviously. You still have Kelly Oubre on that team. You put yourself in position to have Jared McCain come off the bench or maybe even start at that 2-guard position and build off of what was a strong early season rookie campaign for him last year. Like, that team has the chance to be pretty lethal as well. Like, when you go down the list, these teams have the chance to be very nice. The question is just where will they land at the end of the road, because the bigger picture for a lot of those bottom of the barrel teams or even the middle of the pack teams for the Eastern Conference is they have so many what if question marks that have to be answered in order for us to really take them seriously or really consider them as more than just what we see on paper right now. So I don't necessarily agree with Jeff Weltman all the way about it being strong, but I do agree with the idea of him viewing it as balanced or having more potential than a lot of people view it as having coming into this upcoming year. Last but not least, let's talk about expectations, right? I spoke on this a lot the other day when I read the quotes from Paulo Banchero about the expectations of this team coming up this year. And the phrasing, or I guess you could say the ideology to a certain extent, that you heard a lot throughout the Orlando Magic's media day was this idea of like turning the corner or like taking the next step, being able to truly meet these major expectations, because this is a team that's done everything building wise from this offseason to step forward in a way that says like, okay, we're supposed to be up next, truthfully. And a lot was spoken around this idea of just stepping into this new space of, I think the way I phrased it yesterday, and I think the way that I kind of want to continue to lean into it, is being the hunted instead of the hunter. This has been the team that's played the underdog role pretty much the entire time since the Paulo Banchero era started. And it actually starts with Paulo, who's probably been one of the most undiscussed number 1 overall picks we've had in quite some time, especially when you give the pedigree that he has coming out of high school, as well as being drafted from a prestigious blue blood like the Duke Blue Devils, who have had Zion Williamson and Cooper Flagg come before and after him and get double, triple the amount of hype that he got coming out of that draft class, despite the fact that he was equally as talented, if not, on par with those guys in one way or another. But here's what Jeff Weltman had to say about the expectations around this team and what it means. And he says, part of the youth is how do you handle the expectations? How do you handle the pats on the back? We've talked about that a lot on the pod already. He says it's a young group, but they have to process all that stuff together. I think our coaches have done an amazing job of messaging that we haven't earned anything or done anything. I think our players know that everything they get has to be earned. Franz Wagner actually doubles down on that and says, I think the expectations should be higher than any of the other years. I think we added Desmond Bain and some other really good players to the roster. I think talent-wise and mentality-wise, we should go into the year thinking like a contender and not counting ourselves short and believing in the chance that we've got. If you go even further down and you kind of look into what their star player, Paulo Banchero, has to say, he kind of doubles down on some of the quotes that we discussed beforehand, which is this idea of just continuing to build momentum, saying just by going out there and working every day and working to be my best is the main focus of this upcoming season. Expectations from the outside are one thing, but internally you should expect a lot from yourself as a player and a team. The expectations you set for yourself are most important. I think you just accomplished that by going out and trying to work your hardest every day. So those are three very important quotes. I'm going to end the podcast with a quote from head coach Jamal Mosley, because I think that's going to be the one that truly summarizes the direction of this team overall. But what I'll say is this team's expectation level is all determined based off of what they truly believe they're capable of. And I know that sounds cliche. I know that sounds like one of those like things that you hear at the end of a Coach Carter movie or something. But truthfully, for this team, this is a team that when they say sky is the limit, it's not theoretical. It's genuinely built off of the fact that this roster is compartmentalized what talent, internal growth, and building through coaching can do for a team. They acquired new coaches to help with player development this summer. They acquired veteran guards that both address their three-point shooting issues and their developmental issues and their depth issues at the guard position. We got an astounding performance across the board all summer long from Franz Wagner in Eurobasket to continue to build on what is a truly developing forward in this league that's going to be a potential all-star this year. And then you have Paulo Banchero, who ESPN, and obviously this isn't gospel, but ESPN already has as the 17th best player in the NBA, coming off of arguably his most questionable year in the league since being drafted. And that just has a lot to do more with his injury situation last year. But truthfully, that might be the last season might be the lowest that Paulo Banchero gets as far as offensive production is concerned. So this team has the chance to truly punch above its weight, punch even above what the national media's expectations are. It's all kind of built on how they view this season. For example, a lot of people would say that this Orlando Magic team's season will be defined how they address the center position. Well, there's two ways to go about that. You either see internal growth from Wendell Carter Jr., which is empowering him to be more effective and more influential both on the offensive and defensive end, or you take that swing that leans even further into the we are championship contender caliber players, and you go trade for a starting caliber center / all-star caliber center, like we've mentioned a lot throughout the summer, a guy like Nikola Vucevic. What comes out of those two developments, has to be seen down the line, but the viewpoint of it all is that this is a team that's building towards a direction of trying to stamp themselves as a perennial postseason performing team. Not just a team that is a flash in the pan, not just a team that happens to make the postseason but doesn't perform at a high enough level to get anywhere past the first round. This team's expectations are not just high because the national media sets it for them. It's because internally this team has been building towards this moment for the last 2 to 3 seasons, and it's starting to culminate, starting with the Desmond Bain trade and building out further with some of the other things they've done on the margin. But I'm going to end with 2 quotes. It's a Jeff Waltman quote and a Jamal Mosley quote. The first one's from Jamal Mosley that says, "There's nobody outside that locker room that should have higher expectations than us. There are going to be a lot of things written. There's going to be a lot of people saying things about what we could and should do, but our standard is high in what we know we're capable of doing. It starts with our everyday work." Again, very cliche, but also very indicative of the fact that based off what this team looks like on paper as a unit, when you think about what the skill set matching is, the capabilities of this team are through the roof, truthfully. But this is where I will end the podcast. It's with Jeff Weltman's most important quote, I think, from all of Media Day, personally. And he says, I think this year we're turning the corner on that. And the guys that can help us win will play. I think this is a much different perspective as we enter the season. And honestly, it's simplified for a lot of our guys. If you're ready to help us win, you're going to get on the court. That's talking about guys like Tristan Da Silva. That's talking about guys like Anthony Black. That's talking about guys like Jace Richardson, Goga Batazde. That's also factoring in stuff like Jet Howard and whether or not he has a long-term mainstay on this team. That's factoring in whether or not guys like Jonathan Isaac can continue to be experimented with on this 20 to 25 minute per game pitch count when he's paid as much money as he is. Productivity creates progress. And so the guys who fit will stick. And the guys who don't will end up finding themselves in a different jersey by the end of the season, because I think this team is ready to start making the big decisions that matter in order to step into this new light that they're in now, this new spotlight they're in now, which is to be a championship caliber team. So keep that in mind. Keep that quote in mind more than anything. If you're ready to help us win, you're going to get on the court. I think that's going to be an important phrasing for this team this upcoming season, because the guys that we want to see come off the bench and produce, as much as we want to see them, the question is going to be, who are the guys that stick? I'm going to do a podcast where one of the topics closer to the start of the NBA season is my projected top 8 to 9 man rotation in terms of the guys that I think are going to be our top 8 to 9 guys leading the team in minutes played per game. That's going to be my expectation going into the year, and that will change on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis in terms of who I think is the most deserving. But going into the season, I'll have that projection for who I think our 8 to 9 man true rotation will be, as well as, I'll still mention the fringe guys that I think will make up our 10, 11 space. But I think that main 8 to 9 is going to be the most important. Don't be surprised if the players you're most excited about are lower on that list than you expect. Because I think the expectations around a handful of these guys is also going to be a determining factor around how many minutes guys play on a day-to-day basis. But with all that being said, you guys let me know in the comment section down below, how did you guys feel about Orlando Magic Media Day? I felt like it went really well. I felt like a lot of guys were able to express their understanding of the way this season is going to shape out, given the expectations that are around the squad. And I think they've all responded positively to them. And I think the consistent messaging from Coach Jeff Weltman, as well as the star players, I think all of that across the board is good signs that this young team is built ready to make a strong campaign in 2025, 2026. Without all that being said, I will be checking the comment section to see what you guys have to say. Until next time, I will see you guys later. Peace.